What are the best songs from Psalm 7? I'm Daniel Mount, joined today by my co-host, Pastor Chad Berry, and we'll answer that question on today's episode of the Expository Songs podcast. We've each picked 5 songs, and we haven't compared notes. I'll start with my number 5, and that's a song called Angry Every Day by My Soul Among Lions. Usually when I put a song in my top 5, it's because I want to listen to it all the time, or I want to sing it in church, or both. Usually my top 5 are songs that I will give an unqualified recommendation to. This song's in my top 5 for another reason. I have thoughts about it, and I want to talk about them. Some of them are favorable, but some of them are a little critical too. So, for context, this song comes from verse 11. In the New King James, Psalm 7 verse 11 reads, God is a just judge, and God is angry with the wicked every day. Now, with the wicked is in italics, which means it was inserted into the English translation, though not directly present in the Hebrew, because the King James and New King James translators, some of the other versions, believe it is implied in the Hebrew and necessary for context. When you're reading any translation that does this, which tend to be the more literal ones, and you see a word in italics, that's what it means. It means that it's not word for word in the original like this, but it's something that the translators believe is implied and necessary to understand for context. So, to back up, I'm going to go back, for that context, I'll back up to verse 9. It says, "O let the wickedness of the wicked come to an end, but establish the just. For the righteous God tests the hearts and minds. My defense is of God who saves the upright in heart. God is a just judge, and God is angry with the wicked every day." There's this bumper sticker saying in modern day Christianity, hate the sin, love the sinner. And I think some people would apply it to God too, saying he also hates the sin and loves the sinner. Does this passage contradict that saying? It says God is angry every day. What's he angry with? Now, verse 9, I think I like. It would be almost too convoluted to say all this is implied in verse 11, but I think we can fairly say in context, this is what's implied in verse 11. God is angry with the wickedness of the wicked. Now, can we separate the wickedness of the wicked from the wicked themselves? Well, as we consider that question, I think we should also consider one parallel passage, which is Nahum 1:2. I spoke that too quickly. Nahum 1:2, which says, God is jealous and the Lord avenges. The Lord avenges and is furious. The Lord will take vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserves wrath for his enemies. Interestingly, wrath is in italics here. But if not wrath, some synonym is clearly implied by the context. This is Hebrew poetry where you're echoing ideas. It's just the way Hebrew poetry works. So between these two passages, I do think it is fair to say that God loves sinners doesn't fully represent the truth of the totality of what God feels toward the wickedness of the wicked. There's definitely a sense in which God has the love for everyone that enabled him to send his son. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. There are other passages which speak of God's more direct love toward those he calls, those who he elects. But this is, John 3:16 does speak of the world, so there is that sense too. This song, the song Angry Every Day, is provocative. It challenges the notion of God loving the wicked in their wickedness. Now, is it too provocative? Does it go too far? This song has its good points, and I'll come back to those in a minute. I think its weak point, and the biggest point of critique I have toward this particular song, is that it paints an incomplete picture. Now, in some sense, this is not a fair criticism for me to make, usually at least. As someone who also writes songs from Scripture, I know it's not possible to put every single part of the gospel in every song. And even when a song is focused on one doctrine, it's not possible to capture every nuance of that doctrine in 2 or 3 verses, 1 chorus. You're talking 16 lines of poetry, maybe 75 or 100 words. No matter how good of a writer you are, 75 or 100 words, there are some doctrines you're just not going to capture the whole nuance. But when we think about the truth of God's anger with the wickedness of the wicked and his wrath or judgment poured out on the wicked, there is another truth that we have to affirm in parallel, which is that Galatians 3:13, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. And 2 Corinthians 5:21, for he, God, made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. I wish this song talked about God being angry with the wicked, because it's definitely implied in these two passages, but had more of Jesus taking this curse on himself in our place.
Mm-hmm.
Because what's here in this song is true. And I'm not saying it's not true, because these passages do, I think, imply that God's not hunky-dory happy with the wicked. But I think it would have been a more helpful song with God's angry is angry with the wicked, and in his mercy toward us, he took that anger out upon himself, upon his son. And Jesus becoming the curse for us. So for that reason, I wouldn't use this song congregationally. Would I send it to a friend or a family member who is an unbeliever? Not by itself, especially without the context explained of Jesus taking our punishment. Mm-hmm. If that context was established, there is some value here. Because I have known unbelievers who take this attitude of, if there is a God, he doesn't care. He doesn't really care if I sin in this manner or that manner. And for those who might acknowledge there is a God and think God doesn't care about whatever wickedness they might want to do, there really is some potential value to a song like this, especially in the context of a long-established relationship with them where you've been talking to them about these kind of things for a while, and they know your heart. Maybe a song like this could help that occasional unbeliever awake out of a kind of spiritual apathy. But when I said I was going to come back to some positive points, and that kind of was, but here's another positive point. I think this song does have a lot of value between believers, as believers listen to it and think about it, because it is a useful song to prompt conversations that we need to be having with each other. It's too easy for us, it's too easy for me to slip into a comfortable rut of saying, God loves sinners, so we should too. Not dealing with the wickedness of the sinner, and not challenging ourselves with the difficult truths this passage and this song raises. Does this song swing the pendulum too far to the counterpoint of where culture currently is? Maybe so. Especially because I don't think it highlights enough how Jesus took this curse on himself on the cross. But this song does do the important work, and I think it's a very important work, of prompting thoughts that pull us out of just an all-too-comfortable rut on this issue. As I have listened to songs from this psalm, this is the one I can't stop thinking about. I can't stop talking about it, although I need to get to other songs, so I'll stop talking about it in just a minute. But this song sticks with you. It's catchy. It makes you think. And it has merits. I've been critical of it, perhaps too critical, but there's definitely a lot of interesting truth to this song. It just with these caveats.
I actually had that song as one of my runners-up. And the main reason why I had it as a runner-up was twofold. One, on just a real basic level, it does focus on such a small portion of the psalm, and there are so many other songs that are really strong that focus on the broader context.
Yeah.
The other reason being is, I felt that the tendency was, in the grand scheme of things, maybe not necessarily an overreach, but I do think there is a little bit of an overemphasis on the angry every day. Even the way that passage in verse 11 reads in the ESV is it's that God feels indignation every day. And of course, then we have to ask ourselves the question, indignation about what? Well, indignation about wickedness. And so, and understanding that even within the context of the love of God, love the sinner, hate the sin type of deal, where the love that God shows towards believers is different than because he shows love that's been filtered through grace. And of course, love towards unbelievers is filtered through grace, through common grace, as well. But just the covenant relationship that changes things. So that checks off one of my runners up. At number 5,
before you go into that, just a follow-up thought. I looked at this verse in probably at least 40 translations, and maybe about a third of them said God's angry with the wicked every day, and took that from the context. And maybe about a third just said God is angry every day.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are some that kind of softened God is angry to like the more passive tense. I'm not sure it's technically passive, but the more subdued way of phrasing it, God feels indignation every day.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I can understand all points. I can understand why people aren't wanting to be too specific about the context, lest to be misused. So I understand that, and I also understand why somebody would try to see a soft way of saying it. But I can see why it's a little problematic to just say, God is angry every day.
Mm-hmm.
Because without context, you serve an angry God?
Yeah.
People could almost get more bad out of that, of the nature of God, if you're just taking that without context, because God also experiences great joy and delight every day too, in other things. So I can see why I can see the drawback of just people saying God's angry every day. He's an angry God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to insert that one little follow up in there. So now to your number 5.
Yeah, so at number 5, I put Defender, which covers the second half of Psalm 7 by Crown and Covenant.
Okay.
And the main reason why I chose this song is it sticks pretty tight to the text. It doesn't really try to do too much explanation of the text. It just uses a lot of the language of the text. And it's very singable. I've noticed that a lot of Crown and Covenant stuff tends to be, it's written, it's a hymn. It's got the same meter throughout it. It's very, and it would be really doable for, as you and I have talked about, off mic a lot lately, about introducing the singing of psalms. Like, this would be a really wonderful song to use to introduce singing psalms to a congregation that's not used to it. So yeah, I popped it in at number 5 to give good representation to a really well-written, easy singable hymn.
Great. At number 4, I have Psalm 7, "In You I Take Refuge" by Karl Kohlhase. I will be much more concise on this one than the last one, I promise. This meditative, reflective song covers the whole psalm. At least based on translations I'm familiar with, it's not quite setting it to music word for word, but it's close enough to that style that it feels like he almost may have gone, like he's going to almost set it to music word for word. So it's more that than a paraphrase or a song that's loosely inspired by one phrase or one verse.
And number 4, I had Psalm 7, "I'll Give Thanks" by a common Psalter. I don't want to be critical on aesthetics, but if any of the listeners go listen to this song, listen to the lyrics, listen to the melody. I don't love the voice of whoever sings lead, but I think I would probably take a few stylistic liberties if I were to use it. Mm-hmm. But it's very folk bluegrass kind of style, but it's written with a very repetitive meter. And I don't mean the repetitive meter in a negative. I mean that as a positive, because I think it would be very easy for people to pick up on and sing. It's got a really good flow and a really good rhyme to it, and tracks the psalm really, really well. And so I think it would be another one that could very easily be adapted into a church looking to start singing psalms.
That was one of my runners-up. And not only that, but I had been considering whether or not to count Angry Every Day as a top 5, and I'll loosely call it top 5. If I had bumped that one off and just made it a whole separate segment, that would have been in my top 5. So that was a runner-up, and not only that, but it was within my top 6, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So at number 3, I have Psalm 7 by Jamie Souls. He's done 2 songs from the Psalm, so I'll be specific. This is the one where he got the lyrics from the Committee for the Publication of the Book of Praise of the Canadian Reformed Churches. This lyric is in the tradition of the historic psalm paraphrases, although I couldn't find any evidence to find that this itself, the paraphrase, is a historic one. I think it's a new paraphrase, but it's solidly and intentionally in the tradition of the historic paraphrases, where each verse of the song covers a verse or two of the psalm. Mm-hmm. I do think that this is one of the best paraphrases out there, even though, spoiler alert, I do have one higher. And I think it's the best modern paraphrase, because some of the older paraphrases have some harder to sing phrases that are a little clunky poetically. that that we sometimes have in those older ones. Jamie Soul's only version on YouTube is a solo voice and guitar. It's performed live in his home. It's a soulful, bluesy rendition that definitely wouldn't work in every church, but for churches whose musical palette extends as far as soulful and bluesy type songs, this would definitely have the ability to stand out as something that's really unique for these churches, something that doesn't feel like the other psalms they sing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, when you're singing potentially up to 150 or more settings of psalms, it can definitely help to have some musical variety. I mean, this would definitely bring that. It's a well done lyric and a well done melody.
So I actually had that song as my number one.
Nice.
It was the one.
I could have.
Yeah, it was the one that was kind of my earworm. Like,
yep.
It stuck with me. I found myself kind of really like bobbing to the melody when it wasn't playing, and I was like, boy, that's just such a good song. And you're right. I mean, in terms of it's definitely a psalm paraphrase, but of all the psalm paraphrases in the list, I think is just hands down the best one. It does definitely have more of a modern bluesy feel to it, but I could even see it working in our context, where we tend to sing more hymns, and modern hymns is kind of our steady diet. But I think there's a way that we could make it work. I think I could easily swing it in as an offertory on a Sunday that I lead worship from the guitar.
Offertory for sure. I don't know if we could do it congregationally. I was speaking more to congregational.
Yeah.
I think you could definitely do it as an offertory.
Mm-hmm.
I think in our context it'd be a little harder to pull it off congregationally.
Yeah, congregationally, if everybody was singing, it would be tough.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I really liked it.
So I think that puts us to your number 2.
That'd be my number 3.
Oh, your number 3. Sorry.
Yeah, because so my number 3, I had "Arise, O Lord, my God, by my soul among the lions." This one, it's not particularly singable. The melodies, just not conducive for congregational singing, but the song itself is just really good. And I mean, I love their stuff. Their stuff is so good. And this one tracks the psalm well, communicates it well, and with a lot of clarity. Good stuff.
So that one is one of my runners-up. And the main reason it's one of my runners-up is because I didn't want 3 of my top 5 to be for my soul among lions, because my number 2 is "Lay My Glory Down," Psalm 7 by My Soul Among Lions.
So that's my number 2 as well.
Here we go.
Yeah.
This song is so good.
It's wonderful.
I started off with some critiques of a different My Soul Among Lions song, "The Angry Every Day," that I put at number 5. And that's unusual for me, because I really love most of what they put out. And this would fall into that second category. I think this is the best contemporary setting of the psalm that I found. And just to clarify what I mean by that, by contemporary I mean that it has both an original lyric and an original melody. That the lyric and the melody are both modern day and feel modern day. Mm-hmm. And unlike the other songs I have in this top 5, this lyric really focuses on Psalm 7, verses 3 through 5. These verses say, "O Lord my God, if I have done this, if there is iniquity in my hands, if I have repaid evil to him who is at peace with me, or have plundered my enemy without cause, let the enemy pursue me and overtake me. Yes, let him trample my life to the earth and lay my honor in the dust." "Lay my honor in the dust" is really where that title comes from. Mm-hmm. And that's the second verse of the song, I would say, summarizes verses 6 through 9. The bridge covers verses 12 through 15. So this song pretty much covers the whole psalm except for the opening verses, which many of the settings are based in, and verse 11, which is where we're talking about with some of the other settings. Mm-hmm. Musically, it's a minor key song that does a really good job of using chords from both, and sorry, I'm going to throw in some music nerd terms here, but I'll explain them. It does a really great job of using chords from both its relative major and its parallel major keys. And setting aside the terminology, what I mean by that is that it's in G minor, and it does a really good job incorporating the major chords you'd expect, like B flat major and E flat major, and then the unexpected one, that's the relative major. Then the parallel major, G minor to G major. It does a really good job of incorporating your G major and D major chords. Music nerdery aside, it might make more sense if I mention a genre of music. This is something that we often see in Messianic Jewish music, which is based in klezmer music, the Jewish klezmer music of the 18 and 1900s in Europe. And you also see it in some of the other folk musical styles of continental Europe. But the interesting thing is, when I hear somebody doing this, using a lot of G major and D major chords in a G minor song, it often feels messianic. Or it feels Celtic, or what, name your country. The interesting thing to me is that this song doesn't really feel like anything specifically, which is to say, it doesn't feel imitative or like it belongs to a certain genre. It feels like a modern minor key song that makes a thoughtful use of those other chords. So I had to throw in some musical nerdery here because I just really love what they did with the melody and the chord structure, besides what they did with the lyric.
Yeah, it's such an intelligent song, not just lyrically. I mean, lyrically, it's a really intelligent song, but melodically, it's a really intelligent song. I mean, they definitely utilize their knowledge of music theory to communicate emotion, to communicate the mood of the text, not just with the words, but with the way that the words are played. It's just really, really, really well done. And honestly, the only reason why I put Jamie Souls above Lay My Glory Down by My Soul Among the Lions was simply because Jamie Souls' piece is so much more singable, so much more congregationally friendly.
I think, though, I would say because of the bluesy aspect of Jamie Souls, I think I would have an easier time leading Lay My Glory Down on piano. Now, a guitarist, it wouldn't be fun to play on guitar.
Yeah.
But on piano, like, I think I could probably lead and even teach our congregation Lay My Glory Down. And we probably could sing it congregationally in a way that congregationally it would be a little harder to do Jamie's song. Either way. So that brings you up, because we already covered your number one, right?
Yeah, I think we're at your number one.
So my number one, and we were talking about best paraphrases. I wasn't sure. This was initially in my retuning challenge. But this lyric is so good that I kind of actually became persuaded after going through it a bunch of times. This really is actually my favorite song from this psalm. And that's My Trust Is in My Heavenly Friend by Isaac Watts. Introduced in his Psalms of David 17:19. And, initially I was just going to make it my number one pick in the retuning challenge, and it still is. But I really had a hard time placing any other psalm above this the more I got into the lyric. The first half is good, but I think Watts does such a good job of bringing the Psalms to us, to our generation. He'll bring Jesus in, the messianic fulfillment, as the case may be, and the vigor with which he writes really shines through in the second half, where he says, "Let sinners in their wicked rage be humbled to the dust. Shall not the God of truth engage to vindicate the just? He knows the heart, he tries the reins, he will defend the upright. His sharpest arrows he ordains against the sons of spite." I kind of like how he handled verse 11. That was pretty good. "Though leagued in guile, their malice spread a snare before my way. Their mischiefs on their impious head his vengeance shall repay. That cruel persecuting race must feel his dreadful sword. Awake my soul and praise the grace and justice of the Lord." I really like that. I think he handled this psalm so well. Now, it's not associated with any melody strongly, but it's common meter, 8/6/8/6. You can sing it to Amazing Grace if you wanted to. That's not the best fit for this particular lyric, but you could. I actually could envision singing this to the melody of another Watts hymn that some churches know. Some people in church probably know it. "O God, our help in ages past." Not one of his most widely known ones. Is not at the same level of "I sing the mighty power of God, a joy to the world," but people still know it. That melody is a simple melody, but it actually would fit this lyric perfectly. And if you want to use this in your church, but your church doesn't know that melody, unless or until somebody writes a good new melody to it, you could sing it to the melody of All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name, too. That would fit it pretty well.
Yeah.
So, what are your other runners-up if we haven't gone through all of them already?
Yeah, the only other two that I had as runners-up, Psalm 7 by Poor Bishop Hooper.
Yeah.
Was a good one. It didn't stick with me the way a lot of the others did. I couldn't bring myself to put it on the top 5. And then I did want to give a shout out, so I added it as a runner-up. I wanted to give a shout out to one that I thought was just a really good, as close to word for word quotation, and that was Psalm 7 by Ryan Haddon and Friends.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have an actual quotation song on my top 5 list, but I wanted to make sure that I shouted one out, and theirs was good. It was good. There are a couple others that were good, but of all the quotation songs, theirs was the one that stuck out.
I actually considered I thought the Poor Bishop Hooper was definitely in my top 15, maybe top dozen. Mm-hmm. As I was whittling down to a final cut. I have 2 more. Oh, and Ryan Haddon and Friends, I'm pretty sure he specifically sets the ESV to music word for word. I think that's his goal.
Yeah.
So if you use the ESV, it'll probably be even more familiar in that context. Mm-hmm. So I have 2 other runners-up that didn't already come up, and that would be Yahweh My God by Jamie Souls. I just liked his other one better, but that was good, and it was catchy. And there I could see some people for whom that would work. And then Is God Displeased with Those Who Do Not Love and Obey Him by Songs for Saplings or Dana Dirksen. The melody on that's crazy. It has like some Middle Eastern stuff going on. It's a really cool and interesting melody. Brings up the same issues and same questions as we discussed at the start with the Angry Everyday song. But it's definitely a memorable melody and a very thought-provoking song.
Nice.
So, retuning challenge, which are lyrics that we really like that could use a new melody. It's really simple. We name the songs that we think could use a new melody. Maybe we quote a verse or two and let the words make the case. I had 2. I already mentioned one of them as my number 1 overall pick. So you can maybe kick us off on this segment.
So I read Watts's hymn, and I loved it. And I was kind of counting on the fact that you would reference it. So I
you know me well.
So I didn't include it on my list. So I only have one. The second one would have been the same Watts hymn that you referenced. But the one that I picked and the lyrics just gripped me were it's "O Lord my God, since I have placed." Okay. I actually couldn't find an author on hymnary. But a handful of the lyrics. "O Lord my God, since I have placed my trust alone in thee, from all my persecutors' rage do thou deliver me. To save me from my threatening foe, Lord, interpose thy power, lest like a savage lion he my helpless soul devours." And then I'll skip down the last 2 verses. It's got like 17 verses, like good, 16, 1700s hymn writers did, like a good paraphrase does. He says, "On his own head his spite returns, whilst I from harm am free. On him the violence is fallen, which he designed for me. Therefore will I the righteous ways of providence proclaim. I'll sing the praise of God Most High and celebrate his name."
And that's good.
Just a really, not all the verses have as much punch, but the opening couple, the opening setting and the closing setting especially, just have a lot of punch to them that are just really good.
Yes, that is good. Interestingly, my other pick for the retuning challenge was also anonymous, and I could also not find a writer for it. And that's "Jehovah my God, on thy help I depend." Many psalm paraphrases have one accented syllable followed by one unaccented syllable. Emphasis, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Every other syllable is accented. It's something you see in songs, modern day songs, but you don't often see in hymns, to have the one accented followed by 2 unaccented syllable pattern. And that alone makes this stand out. And I think it can help when you're looking for new melodies to have something that breaks up the every other symbol emphasized. It's got a good lyric, too. Jehovah my God, on thy help I depend. From all that pursue me, O save and defend, lest they like a lion should rend me at will. While no one is near me, they're raging to still. So, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I believe you have a relatively recently released book or booklet, as you might call it. So maybe you can mention that before we wrap up.
Yeah, definitely booklet. It's only like 30 readable pages. It's called Ecclesiastes, an answer key to life's big questions. The target audience really is either very new believers or a really even better target audience is unbelievers. As people wrestle through, who am I? Why am I here? What's wrong? It seeks to answer those questions. You can get on Amazon, and actually, if any listener wants a copy, I just ordered a fresh stock of author copies. Just reach out to me, social media, wherever, through Daniel, doesn't matter, and I'll just send you a copy. Because the goal is that it will be a helpful tool for believers to be able to better dialogue about how Christ really is the answer to all the big and difficult questions that we could face in life.
Yes, thank you for that offer, and thank you also for the time you put into researching and recording this.
That's my pleasure.
Thank you. And to the listener, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and subscribe to catch future episodes. You can also find past episodes in the free 74,000 entry Expository Songs searchable database at expositorysongs.com. Thank you for listening.